Have you ever had that feeling like you really want to understand something, like get to the heart of it, without wading through tons of jargon and technical stuff?
Oh, yeah.
That's what we're doing today. It's all about teacher enthusiasm,
Yeah.
what it really is, and why we should even care about it.
That's a great question. And for this deep dive, you've brought us a really interesting study.
Right.
This is a big review article.
Okay.
It looks back at 45 years of research
Wow. 45 years.
on teacher enthusiasm.
That is a long time.
Yeah, it covers a huge span of time, especially considering that the last major review we had on this topic was way back in 1970.
Okay.
So this review is really helpful.
Okay.
It was done by Keller, Woolfolk, Hoy, Goots, and Frenzel,
Okay.
and published in Educational Psychology Review in 2016, so it's fairly recent.
Yeah.
And they really unpack all the ways that our understanding of this topic has evolved and changed.
One of the things that struck me when I was reading this is that teacher enthusiasm is a lot more than just a teacher being bubbly in front of the class.
Absolutely.
It's much more than that.
Right.
And that's really what we want to do today. Our mission here is to really dig into all these different angles that researchers have looked at to see how this idea of teacher enthusiasm has been defined and redefined over time, and then to try to come away with a much clearer picture of what it actually is.
Yes.
Because the authors of this review, they make a really strong case that the research has become pretty scattered.
Right.
And they even offer a new way of thinking about it, a more complete
A
definition.
more holistic definition.
Exactly, a holistic definition.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting that you brought this to the table
Yeah.
because you mentioned that you're personally interested in this.
Yeah.
Because you want to understand what makes for truly effective teaching.
Yeah.
So maybe you're thinking about how to create better learning environments for yourself or for others.
Right.
Or maybe you're just curious about those teachers, those really great teachers who seem to just leave such a strong positive impact on everyone they work with. So we're going to walk you through the main things this review found. We're going to try to break down what 4.5 decades of research on this topic have to tell us.
Okay, so let's start by charting how our understanding of teacher enthusiasm has changed over time. 45 years, that's practically a lifetime in education research, right?
Yeah, that's a long time. And the review points out that the very earliest research,
Yeah.
especially after that big review by Rosenshine back in 1970, it really focused on what teachers did, the enthusiasm they were showing in the classroom. This was back when the prevailing way of looking at teaching was through something called the process-product paradigm, which tried to link very specific teacher actions to their impact on student outcomes. So back then, enthusiasm was pretty much equated with whatever the teacher was displaying.
Right. So I'm picturing like those teachers who use big gestures and their voices, going up and down a lot.
Yeah.
And they're constantly moving around the classroom.
Uh-huh.
So they're really animated, right? That's kind of what researchers like Brophy and Good were looking at, Collins and Murray.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And they were trying to really pin down enthusiasm by studying all these outward signs, all those nonverbal cues and the expressive ways teachers were teaching.
Right.
But the review actually highlights a really big problem with this approach. They point out that there wasn't a really solid definition of what teacher enthusiasm actually was.
Mhm.
Everyone was kind of looking at different things. And because of that, all this research didn't really connect with the other stuff happening in education research at that time.
Oh.
And it meant that schools, if they were trying to identify or even support enthusiastic teachers, they didn't have much to go on.
Right. Because how can you nurture something if you don't even agree on what it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was almost like this isolated concept, not woven into the larger fabric of what makes teaching effective.
Exactly, yeah. So it's just kind of floating out there.
Right. And the review notes that it wasn't until much more recently
Okay.
that the field started shifting its focus inward. So instead of looking at all the stuff that teachers are doing on the outside, they started looking at what they called experienced enthusiasm,
Okay.
which is all about the actual feelings and the motivations of the teachers themselves. So this was like moving beyond just the performance,
Right.
and really looking at enthusiasm as this internal, emotional, and motivational force. A lot of this came from researchers like Kunter and her colleagues, starting around 2008.
Okay. So that's a huge distinction, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all probably met someone
Mm.
who can just put on a show of enthusiasm,
Right.
but they don't necessarily feel it,
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's like, are you just acting enthusiastic? Or are you really feeling it?
Yeah, are you just going through the motions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this shift to looking at what's happening inside the teacher, that also kind of mirrored a growing awareness, right? That, hey, teachers are people too.
Right?
And their well-being and their motivation, that really matters.
It matters. It matters a lot. And if teachers aren't feeling engaged and enthusiastic themselves, it's going to affect their teaching at some point.
Right, exactly. So now fast forward to today.
Right.
And it sounds like we've got these two big ways of looking at teacher enthusiasm.
Yes.
There's the external behaviors that the teacher is showing, the displayed stuff,
Uh-huh.
and then there are the internal feelings,
Yeah.
the experienced enthusiasm.
Exactly.
Right.
And the review points out that this has actually led to a bit of a fragmented picture.
Oh,
You've got all these different researchers focusing on different aspects.
okay.
And while there are some related ideas, like, for instance, teacher enjoyment
Right.
or passion,
Yep.
those have emerged, but it's not always clear how they all fit together.
Mm.
And this is really at the heart of why the authors of this review are calling for a more consolidated understanding.
Right.
They're saying we need to work towards a unified perspective on all this.
Yeah. So it sounds like even though researchers have been studying teacher enthusiasm for decades, we're still struggling with the most fundamental question. What is it?
Yeah.
You don't even agree on a definition, right?
That's really the big challenge here. And the review does a really good job of breaking down the two main ways that researchers have tried to understand this over time.
Mhm.
First, there's displayed enthusiasm.
Right.
And this, as we've been talking about, centers on what you can actually observe.
Okay.
So what is the teacher doing? How are they acting?
Okay, so let's delve into these different angles that people have used to think about displayed enthusiasm. What are they?
Okay, so one way is to look at it as nonverbal expressiveness.
Okay.
And a key figure in this area was Collins. She did a lot of work on this back in the 1970s.
Okay.
And basically, her approach defined teacher enthusiasm based on 8 specific observable things.
Yep.
Like, you think about vocal animation. How much is their voice going up and down?
Right.
Are their eyes wide open? Are they making good eye contact?
Right.
Do they use their hands a lot?
Uh-huh.
Are they moving around with purpose, you know?
Great.
And then facial expressions. Are they using those in a way that seems genuine and varied?
Okay.
And then even how they use words. Are they using a lot of descriptive language?
Okay.
And really important, are they open to students' ideas?
Uh-huh.
Do they seem to really accept and build upon what their students are bringing to the table? And then just overall, do they project this palpable energy?
Okay, yeah.
So it's like 8 different things that you can actually observe.
I can just picture that enthusiastic teacher standing right there.
Right.
Yeah, very clear.
And then another way to look at displayed enthusiasm is through something that's been called instructional behavior.
Okay.
And Rosenshine, in his review back in 1970, and later Murray, they kind of broaden the scope beyond just those nonverbal cues.
Okay.
So they're looking at things like what kind of verbal interaction is happening with students? Are they really having back and forth dialogue? Or is the teacher just lecturing the whole time? Right.
And then the types of questions.
Okay.
Are they asking those low-level, just remember the facts kinds of questions?
Yeah.
Or are they asking those deeper questions that make you think?
Right.
And then are they praising their students?
Uh-huh.
Are they encouraging them?
Yeah.
Do they have a teaching style that's really dynamic and keeps you engaged?
Okay.
Are they explaining information really clearly and effectively? And even things like, do they use humor appropriately?
Right.
So it's not just about how they're acting physically. It's about what they're actually doing as they're teaching.
Yeah. So it's really interesting how they break that down. Really.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Murray, in 1983, did a study using a really detailed questionnaire.
Oh, wow.
It had like 60 items on it,
Okay.
and it was all about teacher behavior.
And his research showed that some of those behaviors that we intuitively think of as, you know, the opposite of enthusiastic, things like just reading directly from lecture notes, avoiding eye contact, those were indeed negatively associated with enthusiasm.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but surprisingly, he also found that shows a strong interest in the subject. That also was negatively correlated with how enthusiastic the teachers were perceived to be.
Really?
Even though teachers who were rated highly by their students were the ones who most strongly endorsed that statement.
That is surprising.
Yeah, it's really counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that if a teacher is really passionate about their subject, that would be like a key ingredient of enthusiasm.
You would think so.
Yeah.
The review doesn't really give a clear answer as to why Murray found this. but it certainly highlights how complex this all is, you know?
Yeah.
And it suggests that just relying on student perceptions alone, it might not be enough to capture all the nuances of enthusiasm, because maybe students are interpreting some of those behaviors in ways that we don't fully understand,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got nonverbal expressiveness and instructional behavior. Those are two key parts of displayed enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Now, the review also talks about teacher immediacy.
Yes.
Where does that fit in?
Right. So teacher immediacy is a related concept, but it's slightly different.
Okay.
It focuses on nonverbal behaviors, but specifically those that create a feeling of closeness during communication.
Okay.
So think about like using gestures, having really expressive facial expressions, making eye contact, and changing your tone of voice a lot. Now, that sounds a lot like some of the things we've been talking about with displayed enthusiasm, right?
Yeah, it does.
There's definitely some overlap there.
So are they basically the same thing?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
A researcher named Babad, back in 2007, he pointed out a really important distinction.
Okay.
Even though the behaviors themselves might look similar, their purpose is different. Enthusiasm, as we've been talking about, seems to be more directed toward the subject matter itself. It's about the teacher being passionate about what they're teaching.
Right.
But immediacy, that seems to be more about the connection between the teacher and the student. So
Yeah.
it's about building rapport, creating that sense of closeness in the relationship.
Okay.
So it's really about the target of those behaviors.
Gotcha. So enthusiasm is about connecting with the content, and immediacy is about connecting with the learner.
Precisely.
Okay. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about that second major way of thinking about teacher enthusiasm, which is experienced enthusiasm.
Okay.
And this is all about what's going on inside the teacher, right?
Yes, it's about the internal state,
Right.
their feelings. And Kunter and her colleagues, starting in the 2000s, they really championed this perspective.
Right.
And they define experienced enthusiasm as that enjoyment and excitement and pleasure that teachers feel when they're involved in their professional activities.
Yeah.
So it's all about the effective aspects of being a teacher.
And they break down experienced enthusiasm into two different types, right?
Yes. They talk about topic-related enthusiasm, which is all about being excited about the actual subject you're teaching.
Right.
And then activity-related enthusiasm, which is being excited about the process of teaching itself.
Okay.
So the interactions with students, the act of facilitating learning. And what's interesting is that they found these two don't always go together.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you could be like a brilliant researcher, super passionate about your area of expertise, but maybe you're not that excited about explaining it to other people in a classroom setting.
Absolutely. It's about loving what you teach versus loving to teach. And the review also points out that there are some related concepts that overlap with experienced enthusiasm,
Okay.
like teacher enjoyment.
Okay.
Frenzel and others have done some research on this, and it looks like teacher enjoyment, it can even influence students.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, through the teacher's enthusiastic behaviors. And the boundary between these two, experienced enthusiasm and teacher enjoyment, it can be pretty fuzzy.
Okay. So is enjoyment like a core part of what we mean by experienced enthusiasm?
That's what the research suggests.
Okay.
And then there's this concept of intrinsic value, which comes from expectancy value theory.
Huh.
And it's basically about how much you enjoy doing a task just for its own sake.
Okay.
And experienced enthusiasm certainly aligns with that
Uh-huh.
because it's about having those positive feelings while you're teaching.
Yeah.
But the review points out that experienced enthusiasm may be missing that more deliberate cognitive part,
Okay.
that piece about why the task is enjoyable,
Right.
which is part of intrinsic value.
Okay. So intrinsic value might involve actually thinking about the rewards you get from teaching,
Yeah.
whereas enthusiasm, that might be more of an immediate, gut level emotional response.
You got it. You're exactly right. And then the review also discusses teacher passion. And this is described as like a really strong inclination toward an activity that you love and you think is super important.
Okay.
And there's a particular type of passion called harmonious passion, which seems like it might connect with experienced enthusiasm.
Okay.
But the review points out that there's not much evidence to support a direct link between this internal passion
Right.
and whether or not you actually show enthusiastic behaviors in the classroom.
Okay.
So you could be super passionate about teaching,
Right.
but not really be that outwardly expressive about it.
Okay. So you're kind of that quiet, deeply passionate teacher.
Right. The connection between that internal feeling and what you actually see needs more research.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So now we've laid out all these different ways of thinking about teacher enthusiasm.
Right.
There's the displayed side and then the experienced side.
Uh-huh.
And now the authors of this review are going to propose their own definition,
Yes.
a new way of thinking about it, a holistic definition.
Right.
What is it?
Well, they argue that teacher enthusiasm should really be seen as the conjoined occurrence of two things.
Okay.
First, you've got to have those positive emotional experiences,
Right.
specifically enjoyment related to teaching.
Right.
So you actually have to be feeling it.
Gotcha.
And then at the same time, you have to be expressing those feelings outwardly through those expressive behaviors that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So it's not enough to just feel it.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to just act it out. It's got to be both.
Okay, so both together.
Both together.
So it's really the combination that defines it.
Yes. The whole picture.
Makes sense. Because you could have a teacher who's just going through the motions.
Right.
They're trying to act enthusiastic, but they're not really feeling it.
Yeah.
And the students are going to pick up on that, right?
Absolutely. They'll sense that it's not genuine.
Yeah. And then you could have the opposite, right?
Yeah.
A teacher who's genuinely thrilled about the subject,
Yeah.
but they just don't show it. And then they might not be as effective at getting the students engaged.
They might miss that spark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to help with future research, the authors are making a suggestion.
Okay.
When researchers are focusing on just those internal emotional aspects of teacher enthusiasm,
Right.
they should use terms like experienced enthusiasm,
Uh-huh.
or maybe some related ideas like enjoyment or passion.
Yes.
And then when researchers are specifically looking at those observable behaviors,
Right.
they should use terms like displayed enthusiasm or expressiveness or even charismatic teaching.
Exactly. Clear labels for each part of the puzzle.
Right, so it's more precise.
Yes, and more focused.
And then the best part of this holistic definition, it seems like, is that it opens the door to studying how these two sides interact.
Yeah.
You know, the feeling and the expression.
The dynamic interplay between them.
Yeah, exactly. So how do they influence each other?
Right.
Are they always connected?
Yeah.
What happens when they're not?
Yeah. That's what we need to figure out.
It's exciting.
It is. So many questions.
Yeah. Now, with something this complex, how do researchers actually go about measuring it?
Right.
Measuring either displayed or experienced enthusiasm? What tools do they have?
Yeah, that's another really important part that this review digs into.
Right.
And they say that while there are some decent tools out there, we could really use some even more robust and refined measures.
Okay.
But they do highlight some of the key instruments that have been used
Okay, cool.
for both displayed and experienced enthusiasm.
Okay, so let's start by looking at how you measure displayed enthusiasm.
Okay.
What are the main approaches that researchers have taken?
One way is to use what's called a low inference instrument.
Okay.
And a great example of this is the tool that Collins created back in the 1970s. It involves trained observers.
Okay.
They actually go into the classroom
Right.
and they watch the teachers.
Okay.
And then they rate them on those 8 specific nonverbal indicators that we talked about earlier. So things like their vocal animation, their eye contact, their gestures, and so on.
Okay.
And they use a 5-point scale to do this.
Okay.
And the review even gives some examples of what those different points on the scale actually look like.
Oh, wow.
So for instance, for vocal delivery, it goes from like a monotone voice all the way up to someone who's using lots of variation in their pitch and tone.
Yeah.
You know, really emphasizing certain words.
Okay, so it's like a moment-by-moment
Yeah.
observation of their behavior, right?
It's very detailed.
Okay.
And several studies have used Collins's instrument or slightly adapted versions of it.
Okay.
And for the most part, the reliability has been pretty good,
Okay.
meaning that different observers tend to agree in their ratings. Brigham and his colleagues, they found that those 8 indicators, they actually hang together pretty well,
Okay.
and they're internally consistent. Murray's instrument, the one that looks at things like how much a teacher moves around, that's another example. Although, as we talked about, his analysis led to some groupings that we didn't really expect.
Right. Okay, so that's low inference. What about high inference instruments for displayed enthusiasm? What do those look like?
So high inference instruments rely on student perceptions.
Okay.
So instead of having those trained observers meticulously coding every little behavior,
Right.
students get to rate their teachers on how enthusiastic they seem using these broader statements.
Okay.
So the review has a table that shows you examples from a bunch of different instruments.
Sorry?
There's one from Feldman that says, the instructor shows interest and enthusiasm in the subject.
Okay.
And Frenzel and colleagues, they have one that says, our teacher teaches with enthusiasm.
Okay.
So it's not about counting gestures or tracking vocal tone.
Right.
It's about getting that overall impression from the student.
Okay, so it's much more based on interpretation, right? It's
Typical
like
person, yeah.
what the student is inferring.
Yeah, it's their subjective experience.
Yeah.
And the downside here is that we don't really know what specific behaviors are leading to those student perceptions.
Right.
And another issue is that some of these statements, they seem to be tapping into the teacher's internal state as well.
Oh, interesting.
So there's one that asks whether the teacher seems to enjoy teaching.
Right.
And that can make things a bit murky because you're kind of blurring the lines between what's displayed and what's experienced.
Right, because the student might be guessing about whether the teacher is enjoying it based on how enthusiastic they appear, but it's still a guess.
Right. It's all based on interpretation.
Yeah.
And the review also points out that a lot of these student perception instruments, they weren't originally designed specifically to measure enthusiasm.
Oh, interesting.
They actually emerged later as a factor within broader evaluations of how effective the teaching was overall. And that raises questions about content validity.
Right. Are we really measuring enthusiasm?
Exactly. Or is it getting mixed up with other things?
Yeah.
But these student report scales, they do tend to have pretty good reliability,
Okay.
meaning that students tend to agree in how they rate the same teacher.
Right.
And it's also interesting that Patrick and colleagues, they did a study that actually found a correlation between those very detailed observer ratings,
Okay.
you know, the ones where they're counting gestures and all of that, and the students' perceptions of enthusiasm.
Interesting.
So there's some overlap there.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so that gives us a picture of how displayed enthusiasm is measured. What about the experienced enthusiasm, the internal feelings?
Right.
How do we study that?
Well, the main way is through teacher self-report.
Okay.
So you just ask the teachers directly about their experiences.
Okay.
And Kunter and her colleagues, they actually created a special instrument to do this.
Okay.
And it directly asks teachers how enthusiastic they feel. And what's cool is that it separates out their enthusiasm for the subject matter from their enthusiasm for the act of teaching itself.
Huh.
So the review gives us some example items.
Okay.
So for teaching enthusiasm, there's one that says, I teach with great enthusiasm.
Okay.
And then for subject enthusiasm, there's one that says, even now, I am still enthusiastic about my subject.
Okay.
So it's a very straightforward.
Yeah, just asking them straight out, how do you feel?
Exactly. How excited are you about this?
Yeah.
And Kunter and her team, they've done a lot of work to make sure that this instrument is reliable and valid.
Okay.
And they even tested it against student perceptions.
Oh, wow.
And they found some correlations, especially for the enthusiasm related to teaching itself.
Okay.
And the review also points out that Kunter's instrument is pretty similar to the scale that Frenzel created to measure teacher enjoyment.
Right.
So again, we're seeing those connections between these different concepts.
Yeah. It seems like measuring the internal stuff is more straightforward because you're just relying on what the teacher tells you.
Right.
But as we said earlier, the real puzzle is figuring out how that internal stuff connects with the external behaviors and ultimately how both of those impact the students.
Yeah. And the review concludes by saying that because defining teacher enthusiasm is so complex, the ways we measure it are also complex.
Yeah.
And it's still an open question whether teachers can really judge how enthusiastic they appear to others, or whether students can really know how a teacher is feeling inside.
Right.
So there's definitely room for more research here.
Right. And we need better ways to measure all of this.
Exactly.
Okay. So now we've got a clearer picture of how teacher enthusiasm has been defined and how it's measured.
Yes.
So let's talk about what the research actually tells us about its impact.
Okay.
What are the correlate and the consequences of teacher enthusiasm? And let's begin by focusing on the teachers themselves. How does teacher enthusiasm affect their own lives?
This is a really fascinating area, but the review points out that we don't have a ton of research yet, and most of what we have is focused on experience enthusiasm. Okay.
However, we do know that teachers themselves tend to believe that being enthusiastic makes them better teachers.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And Kunter and colleagues, they've found some positive relationships between experienced enthusiasm and the kinds of beliefs that teachers hold about teaching.
Okay.
For example, teachers who are more enthusiastic, they also tend to have more progressive teaching philosophies.
Okay.
So they're more likely to embrace like constructivist approaches and multicultural approaches.
Okay.
And they're also better at reflecting on their teaching and thinking about what they could do differently.
Okay.
And they also tend to have a stronger sense of self-efficacy.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Self-efficacy basically means believing in your ability to succeed.
Okay, so they feel confident in their ability to be a good teacher.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it seems like feeling enthusiastic is linked to having a more thoughtful and forward-thinking approach to teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and it also seems to have a real impact on teachers' well-being. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Studies have shown that teachers who are more enthusiastic are also more satisfied with their jobs,
Okay.
and they're more satisfied with their lives overall,
Makes sense.
and they're less likely to experience burnout.
Right, because if you're really enjoying what you're doing,
Yeah.
it's probably less stressful.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like enthusiasm is part of a positive feedback loop for teachers. It helps them stay engaged and resilient.
And it probably makes them even more effective in the classroom, right?
Exactly. It's all interconnected. So if we're trying to create better learning environments, supporting teacher well-being is key. And that might mean supporting their enthusiasm.
Makes sense. Okay, now what about the school itself, the broader context?
Okay.
How does that affect teachers' enthusiasm?
The review points out that the environment definitely plays a role.
Okay.
But again, we don't have as much research as we'd like, and it mostly focuses on experienced enthusiasm.
Okay.
But Cobb and Fuller, they found that teachers are more likely to feel